Good.
Okay, so it's August 9th at 5:35 p.m. This is the Waldoboro Communications and Technology Committee meeting. I'm Ruben Mahar, your chair. We have Thomas, I'm going to say your last name wrong.
Casserole.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you that again next time, too.
Don't worry.
Mr. Robert Butler. Guys, thanks for joining us.
I said that one right.
I practiced Robert a lot. I know I used to.
And it's now Reuben, not Ruben.
Ruben?
That umlaut confuses the Facebook ad robots. And also, I get super bored with Facebook very quickly, which is why my photo is currently the coolest cat I've ever seen.
Okay.
Because when you go on there, it's a cat photo. I died laughing at it, and now it's my profile photo. That is how you social media. Don't put anything important on there.
Well, it's brilliant. Yeah, that seems sensible. Yeah. So we have Mr. Robert, Reuben, and
I like the accent there.
Yeah, my wife calls me Bob.
Bob.
I like it. And of course, I don't have the. Hold on, I'm just going to open up the thing Max very kindly sent us here.
Actually, yes, let's pull that up as well.
Did the agenda go out, Max?
I did not send out an agenda because I think all we really had was just Tom's presentation.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. And if anyone comes in on the YouTube, which I wish they would, I'd like to see more people here. Great. Otherwise, at your convenience, sir, if you'd like to.
Fabulous. Yeah. Should I go to the lectern or?
You're fine actually where you are because you have the mics.
Oh.
I'm just getting everything set up. Got to get the camera on the TV in the back here.
Oh, brilliant. And then we'll do that, yeah. So actually, I can just start talking about this while we begin. So this is I volunteered to do some research at our last meeting about Dig Once after I was curious about this, and some answer. Great typo there. Great way to start. And a lot of questions. This is a really difficult topic, actually, as it turns out. Who would have thought? Actually, we could probably jump to the next slide. And yeah, we talked about this last time, so I think this doesn't really bear repeating. But in fact, just so we're all on the same page, Dig Once, at least defined by the Federal Highway Administration, is just policies or practices to minimize the number and scale of excavations when installing telecommunications infrastructure in highway rights of way. So in layman's terms, this is the analogy of ripping down a wall and while you've got it open there, why don't we rewire it or something like that. And this seems like an easy decision, and this is why I brought it up initially, because I thought, this could be applicable to Waldoboro. But as I discovered, actually, it's not that simple. So I can go to the next slide. Yeah, I threw this in here. You can really read this at some point, really more than anything else. This is just something that I thought was important to discuss briefly. Was basically aerial versus burial deployment of fiber. You both, probably having more time and experience on this committee, probably know some about this already. But effectively, power cables work really well for going overground because copper, turns out, it expands and it contracts during heat and things like that. Fiber doesn't. So actually, fiber is not great to be having out in the open air. It does need more maintenance, but also because anyone who hangs fiber from a pole is dealing with a power company, make ready has to happen every time they want to service it. Whenever, I don't actually know how this happens, but I would expect that whenever a pole goes down and there's an emergency restoration of service, fixing the fiber is not on the list of things to do as well. Whereas obviously conduit, the nice thing about it is that it can go underground and it tends to not get knocked into by trees and things like that. So the other aspect of this is that burial is probably better suited to fiber. The other reason why we don't bury power cables, for example, although in Europe they do, is because generally speaking, currents will get induced in them if they're too close together. There are heat issues and things like that. And generally they can sometimes need more maintenance. So poles make sense for power, right? Poles don't always make sense for fiber, but we still use poles for fiber, as we do, I think, in most of Waldoboro. This is an open question I have, because they're already there, and that makes things a lot simpler. And another thing to note as well is that just because you bury fiber, because you drop conduit, doesn't mean you actually have to run conduit all the way to people's houses. A lot of companies, for example, Google Fiber was the example that I found here. They don't actually bother with then trying to trench to people's houses. They will just run it up to the nearest pole and then run service along the same set of lines there to the same service entrance because it's there and it's cheaper. And obviously the other good thing about conduit is that obviously barring the fact that you shouldn't do it, you can pretty much stuff as much fiber into it as you want without really causing any problems. It doesn't interfere. There's no, like I said, there's no heat generated, anything like that. So just to throw that out there, that's why obviously I was thinking about this in the first place and why it does make sense for us to talk about fiber. So anyway, moving on to the next one, which is just dig once in Maine. So obviously I did a survey of the whole USA, and I'll get onto that in a second. But as far as Maine goes, we asked, I think Max reached out to Connect ME. We asked to advise on this, but they were also asked to advise on this by the governor in 2017. There has been no real movement on this since then. And I think, Max, you said you got something from Connect Maine, or they referred you to another organization.
They referred me to a nonprofit organization. I've never really heard of them before.
Okay.
They were apparently these advocates for it, but it kind of follows the same pattern that you've received from Connect Maine and MDOT, where they've advocated for it, but they just never got real movement.
And this is pretty much the same story everywhere. There's obviously this new Maine Connectivity Authority as well that was recently established. And actually, I don't know if that's something we need to discuss as a committee anyway, or just we should think about that in future as well. Do you see the news about this?
I did. No, that's definitely something we should talk about. I just didn't want to take you off.
No, totally, yeah. But they were only established last month, so we need to wait on that. Maine DOT as well had a plan to implement a dig once policy, but they apparently haven't done so. So that's that. So anyway, to the next slide. So I had a look around for this pretty much everywhere. North Carolina was a really interesting example, and there are a few large metropolitan areas. We're thinking cities like, Baltimore actually has conduit, but they have conduit that's like 100 years old that they put in for power and other things as well. But in general, lots of policymakers come up with dig once suggestions, but rarely do these tend to get implemented. So what I wanted to just dive in here a little bit was just talk about why this is so hard. The effective problem is that you have a bunch of different stakeholders with different incentives. So, for example, for Waldoboro, I mean, I listed this off here, and I really would love anyone to jump in and correct me if I've got anything wrong. But basically, we've obviously got Public Works, Maine Water, whoever does the sewers. So I assume that's the Waldoboro Utility District?
Yes.
Right, okay. Maine DOT for any parts that their roads or anything like that. And then obviously the telcos. These are all the parties who would be interested in coordinating, sharing digging, sharing trenching, or even sharing conduit or anything like that. And they would all have to be coordinated with any dig once policy. So if you go to the next slide, the first issue is basically just coordinating the excavations. This is actually this is the root of the problem, which is from which all of the different policy considerations flow. So firstly, it's time, and secondly, it's money, and these are both, as we all know, kind of interchangeable. You can spend some time to save some money, you can spend some money to save some time, but these are all separate entities with separate interests. So, for example, if someone is excavating and someone else wants to use this excavation, they need to make sure they actually have staff available in the area on that day to actually do this. This is not an easy thing. It's not like they have people sitting around waiting to come and drop some conduit in or install a fiber cable. Schedules will need to be rearranged, and that can work to an extent, but especially when every department has a budget, that's not always something that anyone really wants to do, because it makes more sense for a certain group to work at a certain time. I know this seems probably kind of obvious when you think about it, but it's really important to bear this in mind. The other thing is, I'm putting a note here actually, in all the dig once policies and suggestions I've seen, everyone carves out emergencies. So obviously, if a water main breaks or something like that, no one's going to sit around waiting for an ISP to turn up. That's not how we do things. But, in general, a lack of time or a lack of staffing, or, for example, saying, someone's excavating and then they're waiting for another group to show up. They have to pay the hourly wage of the guys who are waiting to close up the road, for example, or something like that. So are they going to compensate them for that? Or are they going to instead ask the excavators to just drop some conduit on their behalf? Will they pay them for it? Things like that. And these are all kind of difficult questions that will have to be negotiated individually. And it's not just a question of a town and a single telecommunications provider, it is all of these separate stakeholders interacting with each other, and so you've got a polynomial explosion of different relationships that occur. And then finally, this is the biggest thing, and this is where we come to it in terms of policy responses. If you start forcing people to do things, they might choose not to do the other thing that they wanted to do in the first place, right? So if you start saying, drop conduit whenever you go there, or always provide an opportunity for someone else to come in and drop conduit, they might be like, well, actually, we don't want to do any maintenance in Waldeboro if that's the rule, or something like that. So this is another issue with these policies in general, is that they can actually disincentivize, a utility or any other excavator to actually do something that might be beneficial to everyone, or they might pass on the cost to the ratepayers that are there, right? So, if you were to say, when we dig out a water main, we're going to also put conduit in there, well, someone's got to pay for that, and that's the issue. Now, obviously, the costs are lower. This is the great thing about dig once, but there's still the issue of who pays for it. Anyway, so the closest solution, and this is the next slide here, to the whole issue, could you move to the next slide? Thank you. Is when the town owns conduit. So this is something that North Carolina calls dig smart, which is kind of interesting. And unfortunately, as far as I can tell, no one in North Carolina actually does this. But it was recommended and very well written out in a great white paper that I've got in the notes here. Basically, to simplify these relationship issues, the town says, okay, we're going to install conduit, and either you deliberately go and install conduit, or you try and synergize as much as possible in the digging of it, and then you lease it out to any interested parties at a reasonable fee, but not one that still makes it a no-brainer for them to not have to dig conduit themselves. This kind of punts a lot of other problems, though. So it solves the coordination issue to an extent, right? Because obviously the town would know whenever someone's digging up a road, and you can kind of just say, hey, as a condition of permitting, we're going to throw some conduit down as well, and we're just going to pay for it, no worries, but that's just going to happen. But the other problem is that we'd have to figure out things like engineering standards for conduit, and there are no harmonized rules for it. There are some suggestions from some groups, but overall, certain ISPs will want their own conduit. They will want certain bend radii because fiber doesn't just bend like a rope. It actually needs to turn very slowly as you lay it out. So on top of that as well, if the town were to do this, if Waldeboro were to do it, we'd obviously be on the hook for all the maintenance of it, which would hopefully be minimal, but occasionally it could be major. And obviously the install cost. And the worst part, unfortunately, of this is that there's no guarantee it would be used. So obviously, if you say to an ISP, we have this conduit available to you, would you like to use it? They don't have to use it. They may just say, for whatever reason, we don't want to, or they may really want their own conduit or something like that. So yeah, I couldn't find any examples of a municipality doing this. This policy has been recommended by, like I said, NC Broadband Coalition and a lot of other sort of policy groups that tend to talk about things like, how to get America more connected. So the only times I've seen where this succeeded is also when the municipality ends up building its own ISP or dropping its own fiber as well, and then leasing out the fiber, which is obviously an even more expensive proposition. That's, I don't know. We can talk. I'd love to talk about this, but I'm not sure that might be a solution. So
I think you've given us a lot of great data.
Yeah.
I guess I've got 3 notes that I wrote for myself. I didn't want to forget that.
No, please go for it. Yeah.
So one, it sounds like this has been written out at some level across a lot of the state.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is something we could do well to reach out to our local reps about, which I'd be happy to do. I email them on occasion.
Okay.
And just ask you, hey, are you aware of this? Why is nothing happening?
Mm-hmm.
And there may very well be a great reason.
Yeah.
If this is of interest and use to the town, is there anything that there's local power to start? Max, it might be a great question for you.
Thank you.
What in this that's useful could we start just as Waldeboro, if anything? And the answer may be nothing, but I think it's worth exploring. And then at the last point where you're talking about what kind of conduit to go with, in any project I've ever worked in, my brain goes right to, okay, well, what is the most stringent conduit standard, along with, what is the industry, standard bend recommendation? But that gets into something that would probably have to come up with, an actual engineering group or someone at Public Works, or, if we ever had a company like Tilson come in and do a fiber network plan for the town, they could maybe provide that data.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And that just comes from a place of, I love to over-engineer everything, which can be good, can be bad.
Well, this is the thing. You're a network engineer, so you know a lot more about this than I do as well.
Just
I'm
to
a
be clear,
software
so no one
engineer.
thinks I have a power I don't.
Yeah.
I'm an endpoint architect, and I play at networking enough to look really smart to some people.
Right. Okay. Then. Okay. Exactly. So yeah, these are all great points, and that's the thing. I think the point about statewide policy is really kind of what I'm leaning towards, because the thing is, at the end of the day, I am only as capable, and I think we are as a group only as capable as what we have available to us.
Yep.
There's a lot of open engineering questions here and relationship questions as well, right? Like I put into, I think I've two more slides left just to cover I kind of touched on this already, but basically some recommendations are things like mandatory trenching, right? Say, okay, like you're digging this up, you have to go and offer this to other people, right? You have to offer, you're digging up a conduit, you have to offer to other ISPs that you're going to be digging something in as well, right? But there's actually a kind of like an issue there is like, it's a competitive advantage to have your own fiber in a locality. It's not something people might want to do. So, there's a lot of ways that if you try to implement a policy, or if, especially just us trying to come up with a policy or something like that, it could really kind of backfire, right? And it could cause some problems, because it's like someone's like, no, I don't want to actually share with another group or something like that. Not even sure if we had the power to do something like that. But then, so I think the point I'm kind of leaning at there, and I agree with you about writing to reps, is that if we could get some more guidance from maybe larger, more regional groups or something like that, I think that would be very helpful, because I've yet to see any great implementations of dig once anywhere. This is the thing. I've seen a few places where it's like, oh, we got really lucky that we had the foresight to drop conduit when we rebuilt a giant road or something like that. But nothing sort of like, no kind of systematic, like, yes, this has been a huge success for us. And that's kind of like what I'm getting at from here, is that like, I'm not sure a dig once policy, unfortunately right now, I can't recommend really anything that would, I think, make sense for Waldoboro. The one recommendation I do have is at the end, which is basically just that we could try coordinating. So I had a final slide for that. But if you have any other questions or anything you want to cover before I jump to that? Yeah,
Just a comment.
please.
I think you've really raised an important question about ownership. And I can't see competitors ever agreeing to put in conduit for ISPs in Waldoboro and not insist on owning it.
Right. And this is the thing, yeah.
So the only real option is for the town to own it.
Yes.
But then you get into the issue of standards. And I agree with you. If you're going to do it, overbuild the heck out of it so that you are 20 centuries ahead of whatever comes after you've installed it, and you've done the best you can to accommodate future requirements and needs, including the possibility that at some point you might have two ISPs in town sharing the same conduit. And you'd have to write guidelines and policies to accommodate that, to allow for that, and hopefully not discourage anybody from coming in. It's a really tricky issue.
I can't speak for any large ISP, obviously, but what I'm concerned about is, for example, say we were to build conduit, and an ISP would say, great, that sounds awesome, we'd love to install it, but they may want, as a condition of the lease, to have exclusive use of it, even though there's no reason why technically they couldn't share a conduit with another ISP.
I can answer that one thing based on when we were going over our franchise agreement. There used to be, I'm talking like 1980s and 90s, there used to be franchise agreements where they would be, in the agreement, they could be the only carrier of that service. That's illegal now.
Oh, okay, right.
That would be like any given ISP saying, hey, we're going to wire Route 32, we could be the only thing on 32.
Right.
It just isn't going to fly.
Right.
But what you offer one on a franchise, you have to offer others.
Right.
We
So
ran into that problem
right.
here.
So if we put in, some 6-inch conduit somewhere that was space age or whatever the terms are, which I'll admit freely to not knowing off the top of my head, then yeah, build it well, have enough room, and hey, maybe that's a long-term, minor income source for the town. We've got to think about that stuff too.
Yeah, there's a. I don't know if that's the other thing is I don't know if people would take that up on the income, right? It's a kind of a gamble, right? I mean, you'd probably want to check beforehand. Hey, we're going to build this. Will you use it if we built it and things like that? And that's kind of scary, I suppose. Well, it's possible, but it's
No, are you providing value? And I think that could be almost its own work session, certainly with more people in the room.
Okay, yeah.
This data is really, really. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I've got loads of links and stuff, like sort of sourcing on this. I wanted to bring up like individual case studies and things like that, but honestly, there are some really great white papers and things like that kicking around as well that have great case studies in them as well. As you can tell, probably by the end of it, I got almost a little bit discouraged. I was like, oh man, I don't think there's much we can do here. But what I tried to give was something tangible that I think actually we could do today, which is do some kind of, just to start with, to dip our toes in if we wanted to try something like this, would be just some kind of informal best effort coordination. So I don't know if we already do this. We probably don't, but it could be a good thing. I'm looking at you, looking at me.
I think coordination is the big key in this, because I know when I've spoken with Maine Water and the utility district, it seemed like there was this big disconnect between when they do their own projects, because it does certainly save a lot of money when one's already starting to dig, and then it's already open. The material itself not going to be worth as much. So if there was like that nice heads up saying, hey, we're going to be doing this right now, whether it's a month or two, that might be enough time to just let the other entities have enough time to put something together in case they can do it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this would work, and if it does, great. If it doesn't, all we've done is sent an email. That's kind of what I'm thinking here. So if we put together a list of all of the different stakeholders, the excavators and the people who might like to know that there is an excavation going on, really. I mean, anyone who has a vested interest in digging up roads and putting stuff into them, right? So utility, water, telcos.
And even if it is just an email, I think that still would be appreciated, because whenever CMP does some work, or when Department of Transportation does some work, the town office is still the first one to get some calls whenever they're wondering, what on earth are these people doing? And I'm always shrugging, saying, I don't know, I never got told what was happening. So this email notification might still be a good thing, and that we just become the central focus that then make sure it goes out to everyone else in that area, or at least the utilities that would be in that immediate area, because like water goes all the way up to Cross Street, but we don't have sewer that crosses the railroad track. And then, in contrast, I think there's some areas that have on Main Street going up to Moody's, like at that your intersection pretty much. Oh. Like the sewer and water goes up to that intersection, and then it's just sewer to Moody's. So there's no water over there. So like so if sewer was doing something over there, I wouldn't expect to send a notice out to water, because it's not like they're up there.
Right.
Is there a project and operations calendar? And you can't do this to everyone, but for the stuff Waldoboro controls, for the stuff that's part of that ecosystem, is there any kind of medium that you guys could share that would be an Outlook calendar or whatever your email system is, where you just have a calendar that shows what's starting and stopping and when? Because that would give you an overlay.
I don't think there is, but I can check.
Tom, could you find a model policy anywhere?
Yes, actually I did. I found a model ordinance, and this was actually one from This is the only model ordinance I found that exists anywhere, which was the North Carolina one as well, which was
Dig Smart?
Dig Smart, and they had it in their appendix. I'm just looking at it now.
Is it worth looking at and talking about it?
This model legislation that's for municipally owned, for the municipally owned approach. So what this one is basically if whenever an agency or department of the government entity undertakes a public works project involving the planning, construction, reconstruction, or repaving of a public right-of-way, such project shall include, to the maximum extent practical and feasible, installation of underground communications infrastructure by the government entity. So it's pretty limited, but I mean, the verbiage is pretty interesting, to be honest, as well, just about who pays for it, but it doesn't interact with any third parties, as far as I can tell. It's solely limited to, like, you know, a county or a town's, like, if we're repaving a road.
Nobody's gonna dig up the right-of-way unless it's a local government or a regional governmental entity. Very, very seldom are you gonna find a private enterprise digging up something for its own account. It's gonna be for someone else, usually in government. So I don't think that that's impractical at all. I think it's worth looking at.
Oh, okay. I was under the impression that, for example, Waldeborough's public works was sort of limited in what they were doing, and most of the other, I mean, like, for example, like I said, you know, water or, you know, sewer was being handled by the water company or something like that, unless they...
We own it. The town owns both.
And that's unique to Waldeboro. Not everyone operates that way.
Yeah, but the town owns the utility district and it owns the water district.
Well, that's cool.
It's a pretty good opportunity, right?
That is a pretty good opportunity. Yeah. Well, this is great then. Cool. All right. Maybe that's something we could do with this. Yeah. I mean, if we wanted to adopt the policy of installing our own conduit, if that's something we'd be interested in talking about more. I mean, definitely something with, it needs more people in the room. Probably it would need a lot more investigation. I honestly, I didn't think there'll be an appetite for it because I just thought it sounds like a bit of it sounds like an enterprise that we might not be prepared to undertake, but.
Well, to Bob's point, why don't we make that the first known agenda item for the next meeting, give us some time to read over that and just kind of think about how it might execute. And once we've done that and talked about it, we can invite some, or they could come to that meeting. We can invite, you know, some more folks from other departments in the town. It's a friendly group. They come to this stuff all the time. I would rather explore it and decide no than not. And like I said, you've done some great work here. I think we can pull some value out of it.
Okay.
Covered it.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Well, then, yeah, I'd love to. Do I need to make a motion for that to put it on the agenda, or is that just?
I think we're just going to do it. I mean,
It'll just be on the agenda.
Brilliant. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And then the only other thing I was going to say last about coordination as well. I said public works is only stakeholder town controls actually, but now if we do have some control over the sewer district and water as well, then we can. Sorry. Oh, in the yeah. Sorry, like I said, I wrote this down so that anyone who wasn't here could read it. But to whatever extent it's practical, and obviously I don't want to cause anyone any overhead, but we could sort of say, hey, public works, please try and make a reasonable effort to accommodate any conduit installation or anything like that if another entity wanted to do it. So some kind of coordination policy, some sort of even just informally sending out an email whenever something happens, and maybe having the town planner or the director of public works serve as a facilitator of any communications without obviously incurring any extra costs. I don't want this to be like a burdensome thing. Could be just as an immediate way to get started as well. It could be something else. And this is whether or not we chose to look into like municipal conduit, which would be related but separate. So yeah, anyway, that is everything I covered here. So sorry for going on so long. But
well, that was the whole point, is to have you educate us, and you definitely did that.
Great. Okay, awesome. That's awesome. Okay, cool.
So we'll have that on the agenda, and we'll want to, even now, before you start reading, start thinking about it. What does Waldeboro control? How can we leverage that?
All right. Okay.
We actually have a water committee. We have the public utility district meets. I think, is it once a month they meet, Max, at least?
I believe so.
And,
and
there's nothing against having a get together with both entities.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of brain power, a lot of experience to take advantage of.
One of their committees and talk about it.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. No, I mean, as you can tell, I know I'm such a neophyte at this. I really don't know who owns what and things like that. But
if we had experts in all this, then we wouldn't need these committees.
Yeah, well, we're figuring it out. Yeah. Cool. All right. So in terms of municipally owned conduit, that's something to definitely explore, and we can talk about more at the next meeting. I'll go away and think about it and.
Could you send out that North Carolina ordinance, the model ordinance?
Yes,
to
yeah,
us?
absolutely. So it's attached to the bottom,
Or
and
just a link to it.
Yeah.
We'll have access to it.
there's another thing here which I don't know if this is interesting or not, but they have an exception where they exempt any excavation less than 900 linear feet, which I don't know if that's maybe we could expand that down a little bit, but.
I think that might just be for like when it's like very small minor maintenance issues.
Which
not necessarily an emergency like the water main breaks, but it's like, you know, we just got to replace this one valve because it is getting to that point or something.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think would make perfect sense. Yeah, something there would have to be some kind of reasonable cutoff point as well, and that's why as well I wondered about starting as well with a communications or coordination thing, because maybe by doing that we actually start getting a good feel for what other people are interested in or would find useful. Like if there is an appetite from other stakeholders to, if they do want conduit and things like that as well, that's a really important thing to ask, you know, and get answers to those questions. So I think that could be a part of this as well, whatever we end up doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah. Cool. All right.
One concept I want to throw out there, and it's before I lose the idea. I don't know what is being installed in the ground for water and sewer, but there's gizmos now that you can monitor via network connections. So it might even be advantageous to put some of that conduit in so they can run their own private fiber to monitor some of those things. And it depends on how advanced you're going. I don't pretend to understand the full infrastructure here. Mm-hmm. But broadband aside, there's other advantages to the town for a lot of this stuff.
Actually, this is a really good point. I'm trying to recall where I saw it, but someone wrote about using underground fiber as part of a smart grid. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about it was that even though you still have aerial poles, the nice thing about it is that the smart grid carries on to an extent running even when a pole goes down, which is a relatively common occurrence compared to conduit breaking or something like that, which is, it kind of adds a layer of sort of redundancy and resiliency that you don't have if you try and implement it just by running things.
Yeah, it hardens your infrastructure.
Yeah.
None of us are strangers, I don't think, at this point. I don't know if you've had the pleasure of a winter storm where the power goes out for 3-4 days.
I'm really lucky in that I'm on the whatever part of the grid serves the town office.
And I haven't had a huge problem with that myself. What I'm really getting at is that it's really a New England experience. It's certainly not a Waldeboro only problem. So as you're digging up other things, when I've talked about, you know, improving life for people for the next century, those exact pieces are how you start doing that. So I'm excited to see those other conversations with these committees going, because I think we might just have a hold of something here.
Cool.
It's worth exploring.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Great. Okay, cool. Well, all right, that's it on that front. So do we have anything else on the agenda?
I could talk, I mean, you two you weren't at the EDC meeting last week.
I was a part of it, I think, was I?
No.
No, you're right, I couldn't go. Thank
You
you.
were totally absent.
I was.
Very
That's a
unusual.
weird feeling, Bob. I don't care
We
for
missed
it.
you.
I miss being there. I like those meetings.
I can talk about the EDA that Bob now is familiar with, that I think I told you on the phone. If people want me to talk about this, Tom, it would probably be new to Tom.
This is all completely new to me. I don't know what everything you're
let's get up
referring
to
to.
speed.
Run it together, Matt.
Let me get up to the table then.
Come on up, sir. You're the next contestant on.
What does EDA stand for?
Economic Development Administration. So, so this is the thing that I usually break the ice with at some point, but I'm not really the actual planner here. I'm a consultant, technically. I work for the Mid-Coast Economic Development District, which is like the Council of Governments. Mm-hmm. I could keep going on with all these different weird acronyms and everything, but I'll just say I'm a consultant. Anyways, part of my job is to get federal funding through this program called Economic Development Administration, or EDA, which is like big public works projects for some towns. The example I like to always just talk about is the Damerscott one that's happening now, where they got their bathroom done. They're going to fix up the parking lot next year and possibly get a seawall in. That's always up in the air at this point. But like that's the big example I point to, because that's the one that's happening right now. Pretty much it's a program where its goal is to
create more jobs because it's going to create this new need. So it's usually sewer and water, and broadband's now become the new topic. In Denver Scott's case, a bathroom apparently. But because of the most recent stimulus bundle, the American Rescue Plan Act, they're actually putting a lot more money into the EDA projects. So usually you can get up to 50% of your project funded for. But if you qualify under this ARPA program, you get a minimum of 80% funded through the federal government. So that's certainly nice. And they want something to either address how a community was significantly hit by COVID. So if you're like a big tourism community, you were greatly impacted by that, or a town that had a lot of businesses shut down because they couldn't comply with COVID standards and they had to shut down, or you make the town COVID resilient. So what is the project going to do that makes your town avoid the next pandemic, which is more just diversifying the economy or broadband. So pretty much what I was telling Ruben a bit last week was that it now isn't actually too crazy to have this idea that, because what I've always kind of been saying when we talk about the town-wide fiber system, it's kind of crazy because there's not going to be that much grant funding, but now there actually kind of is. Unfortunately, we would have to be shovel ready for this type of project, and we would have to submit an application by the end of March of next year. So 2022, we'd have to have our 20% match. We would have to show evidence that there's enough support in the community, and we'd have to show that what we're going to do is actually going to create jobs, or it's something that is in response to COVID, which I don't think it's going to be too hard to actually make that case, but I digress. I guess my point is that's even if that is something that we could consider, and with the ISP search, that might actually tie into this, depending on what the cost ends up being. And worst case, if we miss the boat and we don't get to have the big town-wide fiber system next year, at least having it prepared, I feel confident that, like, the new $1 trillion infrastructure bill, I feel confident they put some more money into this type of program, especially if they see how successful it is. So even if it's not 80% minimum, we might be able to get 60%, maybe 70% possible for future EA projects. And it doesn't have to be the big town-wide fiber system. If we're doing sewer and water expansions, the Dig Once policy that you're talking about, that can just be incorporated into it, because we'd have to coordinate a time to get sewer and water expanded or dug up.
This is really interesting. Right.
Because, like, we do have the sewer and water laid out wherever, but...
So it makes the Dig Once ordinance even more time relevant.
It wouldn't even really have to be an ordinance. It would just be... It would probably be more of a policy that we just need to make sure we keep in mind if we do an EDA project that does involve, like, sewer, water, or any road type expansion. Because, like, I don't know, the EDC always talked about, like, getting utilities up to the industrial park, like George Seaver's one on 32. That's like 2 miles on 32. Maybe that's a $5 million project. That can be 80% of that's funded, so $4 million of a $5 million project is covered by the federal government. We get the final $1 million, and then there's your opportunity for a Dig Once on 32.
That's really exciting. I actually had I took it out. It's actually in the notes in the final one. I said maybe we get lucky and Maine Water has to replace all the pipes at some point. And
That'd be nice.
Yeah, well, but you're talking about I didn't realize this was on the table, actually, even this kind of basic infrastructure stuff. So
and that was something I was probably going to bring up. The maintenance is something that we might have to get a policy for, but when we know the town is actually going to do an expansion, if we have an idea of how much the conduit would be and what work would have to be for that,
that can then be put into those public projects.
And it could just be included as a line item on it, and it wouldn't be.
As long as it's not too significant of a cost, really. But
Yeah.
yeah. Because, if we're doing a $1 million project and doing the conduit would add another $1 million onto it,
Obviously, yeah.
then, yeah, we're probably not going to do that. But, if it's a lot less, like maybe just an extra 10%, that's probably fine to move on with it, to add it on.
And if we were to do something where the town actually owns it, builds it and owns it, or something like that, I mean, obviously, I think that would require ordinances, wouldn't it? Something like that if we started doing.
Well, let's see what the language of the
town-
North Carolina thing says.
Okay. Yeah.
That'll get us going.
Okay.
And we've got resources to run that all by to see what's okay, what's not okay, what we need to change.
Cool.
But I do have a quick question about the conduit and what that would involve. Would we have to have it like attached to the dark fiber line that's running through the village right now on Route 1, or would we just, like, what would the starting point for this conduit be?
It's an empty pipe that we own, and once it's there, if people want to put stuff in it, you would have those conversations.
Oh, so like the conduit we'd put in, it's like CMP would just put their electrical lines, or
Well, it depends on what
LCI
you,
would put their fiber line or
yeah,
something?
yeah,
Okay.
it depends on what you want to run it for.
Okay,
Like Tom pointed out, the electrical thing is its own separate thing, but let's say you have to put water down Route 1.
Right.
I don't think you would have to, or even could mandate stuff that's up on a pole has to go in there. But right now, First Light owns most of the fiber that comes straight down 1. It's part of 3 Ring. So other companies that want to connect people have to lease that at a very high cost, by the way. If that empty conduit's there, they could run their own stuff, and I would presume that's probably going to be less expensive to them versus getting on the poles. Never mind less time intensive, because they don't have to deal with other companies. And these companies will use the
Just
pole
deal with the
mounting stuff.
municipality,
Yeah.
goes through, you're done.
And then they're not, company A is not going to try to use the leverage of what they own in the pole to slow down company B, which is a thing that happens.
Right.
And if the town owns the empty pipe, we don't care about what's in the pipe so much as we get to make the rules, say play this through their neighbors or whatever.
It's as far as I can tell, when it comes to like owning the pipes, the recommendation is really along the lines of like have it just it's about how much space it uses within the pipe, right? And sometimes you can get conduit as well that's like divided, so you can literally have physical, because some companies want a physical separation between their fiber and someone else's. I don't know why, but they do apparently.
Well, I'm sure it's harder to open the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Unless I don't know what colors you can buy, but I don't know if you've ever seen a spool of fiber, but it all looks like the same stuff.
Right.
It's just a big black wire.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, it's as far as that's the thing, is that the only other thing about fiber in general is that you need access to it as well. So you need to put like a kind of a manhole in, right? But that's in terms of actually when you're dropping dead conduit or like dark conduit, kind of like dark fiber, you don't actually need to even have built the manhole if you don't want to, like, because that's a small excavation relatively speaking. Like you could just literally just have to have the conduit there, and then you're just going to have to dig it out at some point to actually put the access points in, because you may not want a manhole there, you may want to just connect more conduit to it at a later date. So like unless you don't need to, but because that's only like something that's literally big enough to just access it, connect some fiber, and then plug it into another conduit or something like that, or run it up a pole to somewhere where it needs to be, that's not really a big issue. The biggest thing is literally just that length, as far as I can tell. Like that's the cost saving that's coming in from this. Although then again, putting in the manholes, maybe that would be a good thing to do as well.
Those manhole covers are really neat. If you look them up on YouTube, I think the best place to put those is wherever they might branch off, or where they might switch over to connect to homes and businesses, because what you can do with them is they can pull their vehicle over these things. So even if it's inclement weather, they can pull right over the manhole, it opens, and they can pull up their interconnects into the truck. It looks like it's from the future.
That's really cool.
So in terms of them maintaining that thing, I have no idea what that piece costs, and that might be worth exploring there. But at the very least, you leave a blank for it, like, hey, they might cut here someday, that kind of thing. So at your street intersections, stuff like that.
So Max, where are we with the Route 32 sewer concept at this point? Is it still?
The what?
We had talked about making a choice between applying for 80% funding for a Route 32 sewer line, or maybe something up to behind Miller School for the medical arts building, and then you
Yeah.
concluded it would probably have to be two separate applications.
Yeah, that's something that I need to talk with my EDA contact about, because I think what would help is to know how much of the medical arts project could get EDA funding, because it isn't, especially with COVID, it's actually not outside the realm of possibility for them to potentially fund the actual medical arts building, although in limited capacity. And then, but I don't know if there's a difference between who is applying, because it was like, I won't get into the specific details of their applicants, but like they've done like clinics, they've done nonprofits. I don't know exactly how much the Lincoln Health main health system would be able to qualify. So I'll ask. My contact always says it's always a case by case basis. So I take him at his word for that. So I'd have to see, because if he says the medical arts building would easily get it and possibly even get more than 80%, I wouldn't even be asking anyone a question. I'd be saying, let's do the medical arts building immediately, especially if I'm told I can get more than 80%. But if not, then it might be better to do the 32 expansion.
Yeah.
But then even that one, I'm a bit iffy about, just because I remember just driving up 32 after I told everyone about that, and it certainly would help, like the industrial park and that immediate surrounding area. But just driving up, there's certainly a lot of, it would mostly be a residential focused one, which I'm not against, especially if we can get people who are along like Madomic River's portion of it to get off septic and onto the sewer. But details really. Long rambling answer short. I will just have to talk with the person from EDA and get a better answer, and then hear what Julie and Lincoln Health have to say, because that's all a big part of it. And actually, the other part is the Congressional Delegate spending thing that I think I've told you about. These two, I guess. In addition to all this, the main delegation, like the House and Senates, have requested pretty much everyone throughout the United States, hey, we're going to try and get back to the earmarking method of doing these congressional budgets, where they just ask everyone in their districts, hey, is there a big project you have to go to that qualifies under these other grant programs? And so one of them was USDA, and more out of a long shot bid, I submitted something so that we could possibly get $1 million for the medical arts building. And Senator King, I believe, said, yeah, sure, we'll include that if the Senate's fine with it. So who knows? We have a 5% chance of getting $1 million for that through just the Senate congressional spending.
I mean, if you hadn't done that work, it'd be a 0% chance. So
That's true.
thank you again.
It was 1% at the beginning.
Yeah. Hey.
I didn't realize they were bringing back earmarks. That's
Yeah, they were actually kind of quiet about that, because I only knew about it from Representative Pingree back in like April. I didn't even know about the Senate one until like a week before the deadline. But it was like, cool, okay, we're doing this again. I mean, if we got the congressional delegate spending one, I want to just do the medical arts building for the EDA project done.
So the ball's in your court, right?
Not really my court.
Is there something we need to be doing to push this?
Praying? In seriousness, no, I mean, I'll talk with my person from EDA, see what they have to say. If they say the 32 sewer is a much better idea, then that's the recommendation I'll tell everyone else, and we could still do the medical arts building. I'm talking with someone from Maine DEP about the wetlands for that site,
Right.
because he might come in and say, the cost is going to be so much, you're better not doing this at all, and maybe that's going to be the next part. Or I might get a call and say, yeah, you got your congressional delegate spending item done and you're getting $1 million from the medical arts building. And that might be the sign of saying, okay, well, we got that, might as well get the rest of the funding.
Okay.
So,
Gotta wait. Gotta wait.
Thank you.
That's great work, and that's a lot of great news. Thank you. It's take a second to let my brain adjust to that.
I just want to get the money, though.
No, keep at it. With all this stuff going on, is there any reason to not go forward with asking our ISP question on who would be interested in building a fiber network here?
I will still send that out.
Okay. Do you need any time from me or anyone else to? I certainly don't want to badger you about that. So this is not that angle. Do you need anything for that? Do you need any time for that? I'm just looking for what can help you because you're doing so much stuff.
I guess I just need to know who I just need the contact information, I guess. Because LCI and charter, they're easy. I don't know if there was just a list of companies you wanted me to send it to, or if you just want me to find whoever's in Maine and just send it out.
So if anyone disagrees with this answer, we'll pause. My thought is, I'd like to get LCI and charter done as soon as possible, just because we know who they are.
Yeah.
And then from there, really whoever you can think of, which in my mind would be, it's worth reaching out to First Light, it's worth reaching out to Consolidated Communications, and the other thing we need to come up with is how long we want to wait to see who answers us, which I think 60 days is probably a reasonable number. Any thought on that?
60 days, you should.
So it's not, I mean, we're not asking anyone to commit to anything.
Well, are we gonna get in touch with Connect Maine to ask them for a list as well?
I will reach out to Connect Maine. I'll send an email to Connect Maine before I leave tonight.
Yep.
And then I'll work off that list.
One other good contact might be our friends over at the Allen Institute. They're still involved in broadband all over the place, and they seem happy to answer. I can't think of a negative interaction I've had with that when I've had a question or wanted to have a conversation. And then, the goal there is whatever they say, those particular conversations, I'm going to imagine that they'd all come back and say, hey, we want to own the network, which is fine. This is just one avenue. Mm-hmm. For each of those, the follow-up question would need to be, okay, how do you want to design your network? Like, I think LCI has a thing where they'll work with us to get, a company that designs municipal networks or their fiber network to do that, but they own that data. Charter would be the same thing with their own internal engineers. All right. So just so we have so many moving pieces, I just wanted to bring that back up. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, it does.
Great.
Do we also want to talk about the survey where we are with that?
Oh, right. So we were talking about the survey just to the unserved homes, right?
What do you mean? Max sent out a survey earlier as well.
That one, that one can actually be forgotten because of the ISP one.
Okay.
Because I reread it, it was like, it's really not necessary until I guess the ISPs are done, because we don't want anyone to really commit to any funds until we know how much we're asking.
That's fair. The whole goal of this is who's interested, what can they potentially provide, and then a price tag on that. If I got to make a wish, it would be that they'd be able to deploy a network that would do 100 meg synchronous on day one, and we can worry about later expansion later.
I'm talking about something separate.
The unserved pocket one?
Yes, that's right.
I still need to send that out.
Okay.
And just a reminder on that piece, and this is outside that survey, and this is something I want you guys thinking about. If we get to the point where we're planning, let's say we're planning that Charter's going to come in and build fiber over their coax, which would be super neat. We want to start thinking about what we would want to ask at later points of those conversations. In terms of unserved homes, it's, hey, can you please start building where there's nothing? They're going to have to do their home runs and stuff, but I don't care if fiber passes my house immediately. I've got cable, which is better than the people that don't have anything. So however this can be arranged, I'm looking for whoever starts, whatever they start, to start in those areas. Worry about, there's more money in the more densely packed places, but our goal back to our home run is getting broadband where it is not.
Yeah.
And so while this would get a product everywhere, I'm thinking about those homes that don't have anything. So I just don't want to lose sight of that either.
I agree, I just don't want it to put a kibosh on the business plan somebody might come up,
Oh, absolutely.
so.
Yep. And that, I mean, I'm not talking ultimatums. I'm talking,
No, I
is this possible? If they
Yeah.
come up and say, no, we need to do it this way. If I'm approached by someone from an unserved home and they ask me, I can look them in the eye and say, we asked this question, here's why we're going where we are. And while I might share some frustration with them, I'll feel good about the answer again.
Right.
And that's what I want to do.
Yep.
It feels right.
I agree.
And there's also is there a possibility of like a public-private partnership model there as well, where if funds were needed or something to make the business case or something like that?
I don't think anything's off the table. We're asking a really wide question now. So if LCI came back and said, hey, we want to talk with you about building a town-wide fiber network, fiber to every single address. Okay, great. And then when they sit down, there's probably an executive session or something in there somewhere where you plan out details where they come up with confidential stuff to talk over.
Right. Okay.
So this is who will come sit at the table, seriously with us.
Right. I see. Okay.
So yeah, nothing's off the table. That's just
Right. Exactly. And that could be one part of it. I see. Cool. Yeah. All right then.
Okay.
Any other comments, thoughts, questions, or concerns?
Nope.
When's the next meeting?
First Monday of the month.
So we're looking at September,
Oh, wait.
Labor Day. Right.
Second Monday of the month? Should we just make the second Monday of the month hold on. I worry if I'm saying that.
According to
Like
this.
September 6th is Labor Day.
Yeah. I was gonna say let's just make the second Monday the permanent CCC thing, but I feel the second Monday of October is
So the second
Business
Monday of
Day.
September is the
It is.
13th, is that what we're looking at?
September 13th.
September 13th?
Yep.
Okay, I'll put it in.
Because Mondays always have to have.
I may have to call into that one because I think I'm going to be in Farmington, but that'll work.
There. I'll
right.
send out the notice a week ahead of time and see what we have for attendance.
I am looking at my calendar right now.
I've got it in my calendar.
So good to
Oh yeah, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All right. I'm glad you didn't really just want
Oh,
to stay
wait,
here for
were there
3 more
minutes?
hours because you could have.
Did you approve the minutes?
No, we didn't even talk about the minutes. Has anyone read the minutes?
Yeah, read all three of
Yep.
them.
Motion to approve all 3
Motion to
minutes?
approve.
So moved.
Aye. Minutes are approved.
Now we can adjourn.
We are